Giannis really dig deep and take this team over in Game 5. Because if he doesn't have a big night, the Bucks could be in trouble. Now, I have them winning this in 7. I think you have them in 6. So it's on pace to meet one of those. However, the Bucks have to play better as a unit in Game 5.
You're absolutely right, and this is the MVP moment. We gotta trademark that for Giannis. Game 5 will be his MVP moment. If he can't step up and really take over the game, I think it might be tough for the Bucks here. I mean, the Raptors have got their momentum back, and again, that supporting cast for the Bucks has just got to be better. Giannis had a bit of a rough Game 3. He did have 23 boards, but he wasn't himself. He ended up fouling out. He had the most turnovers he's had all season with 8, Jason. So it's not to say that he's been immaculate during this series either, but ultimately, a lot of this is going to come down to the fact that the Bucks need some of those other guys to step up. Now, they always say the role players play better at home, right, Jason? So we'll see how that goes. The other thing that's going to be interesting for them is that Budenholzer has continued to play his veterans and his bench. He had Pat Connaughton playing 14 minutes in this game. Brogdon, I think, who actually maybe could play a little bit more, played 28. George Hill, 27. Now, the question is going to be if we see, as we mentioned, Jason, a few less minutes for guys like Eric Bledsoe, who, interestingly, only played 20 minutes in Game 4, Jason. And you do wonder if that's a sign of things to come. If Budenholzer is going to start turning to Brogdon or George Hill in that starting lineup. I mean, you could start Brogdon very easily in this series without much in the way of repercussions. I'd be interested to see if Hill, Brogdon, or both of those guys get a little bit more run as this series goes on, as they've shown the ability to sort of hurt the Raptors in stretches.
I don't know about all that, Ben. I think the minutes were inflated because they were down 20 points in the fourth quarter, Ben. So obviously you're going to see the bench guys play a little more. But I think Coach Budenholzer is a guy that sticks to his principles, and you're going to see a normal rotation in Game 5. If you're the Bucks, listen, you have home court advantage. The Bucks held serve in Games 1 and 2, then the Raptors held serve. So they have to win 2 of their next 3 at home in order to advance to the NBA Finals. And nobody saw this coming, even with LeBron leaving the East. So the Bucks are a very good team. They have a lot of good players. And as long as they hold serve at home, they'll be playing for the NBA championship in June.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's what the regular season's for. You know, ultimately, give them credit. They played their guys during the regular season. They played great during the regular season, and that's earned them home court advantage. So ultimately, that's what you play. That's what the games are played for, is that so you can have 2 of the last 3 at home. It's a little cliched, but this has turned into a 3-game series, Jason. It's now best 2 out of 3. And the Bucks have a chance. Obviously, they're going to have 2 of the 3 at home. So it'll be fun to watch to see what kind of happens with them, because, I mean, they've played like the best team in the league for long stretches of this season. And now I think it's time for them to show it. And frankly, Jason, I'm going to go to my heat check of the week. For me, it's the Bucks who, coming into this series, and still, I feel like have a chance to challenge the Warriors. And this is their time to step up. Coach Budenholzer and some of those guys need to play well and show that they're the team that won 60 games this season. Giannis has to show that he is the MVP candidate and presumptive MVP, the guy that both of us thought deserved the MVP this year. He has to play like that. He has to put the team on his back. This team has to play up to the level that they've shown us the rest of the season. And if they do that, Jason, I think they have a chance not only to win this series, but to win the whole thing, because they have the talent, they have the coaching, and they have the star power of a guy like Giannis to really go far in the postseason. But it's time for them to step up. This is the first adversity that they've really faced all postseason. They swept through the Pistons, they lost Game 1 to the Celtics, and then just absolutely steamrolled them. Now they're facing a team that's not quite as easy to dismiss. This is a team in the Raptors that has the talent. They have the top-tier guy in Kawhi Leonard. And that means the Bucks need to step up. They need to play up to their potential, and they need to show the world what kind of team they are. And if they don't, Jason, they'll be packing their bags and headed back to Wisconsin, because this is not a Raptors team that is the same old Raptors who just choke. They showed here their resiliency by stepping up in games 3 and 4 and pushing this series back to Milwaukee. So now it's time for the Bucks to do the same and show what they're made of.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, you look at their record this postseason; they're 10-3. You look at 10-3, and you're like, okay, this is a really good team. But on the flip side, the Raptors only finished 2 games behind the Bucks for the best record in the Eastern Conference. Now, I think that's significant because they have to feel pretty good about their chances, Ben. But you're absolutely right. Let's see if they can finish it off with these 2 games at home, or if they can win in 6. We'll see how they play in Game 5, though.
Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately, we'll be back next week for everyone, where we'll break down the NBA Finals in a little bit more depth as we know who the actual teams will be. Obviously, there's a lot of basketball still to be played in this Eastern Conference Finals. But Jason, there were a few other stories that we wanted to hit on briefly. The first one stays in the Eastern Conference, and that is a rather sad story, Jason. Tyreke Evans, former Rookie of the Year, top 5 pick, a guy who's had a lot of ups and downs in his career, may have seen the biggest down, and it may ultimately be what ends his NBA career. He had a drug suspension, was caught using something. We don't have the details yet, but as a result, the NBA is suspending him for 2 years. He can apply for reinstatement. At that point, he will be 32 years old. He's 29, turning 30 this year. So 2 years off his career, Jason. I mean, what do you make of this, and is this the last we're going to see of Tyreke Evans in the NBA?
Unfortunately, I think so. And this may be a little bit unfair, Ben, but I'm giving my 0 of the week to Tyreke Evans. We don't know what the drug was, but it kind of just gone steadily downhill. He had stints in New Orleans, in Memphis, and he just hasn't been the same player. He joined the playoff team in Indiana, stepped up while Victor Oladipo was out, but now he gets himself suspended for 2 years. He's out of a job for 2 years without pay, and that's tough to overcome. So Tyreke Evans could not keep himself in line. So I'm giving him my 0 of the week with a caveat that if it is marijuana, I know Adam Silver is doing everything he can to change those rules for NBA players, but still, you have to look at this as the NBA made an example out of Tyreke Evans. And you're right, Ben, his career very well might be over.
And we apologize for any audio issues you might have. Jason is calling in from the car, but I think you make a great point, Jason, that he might have his career be over at this point. I mean, the ups and downs have been there. He had some great seasons there in Sacramento, particularly his rookie year. He had a couple good years in New Orleans. He improved his three-point shot. He ends up going to Memphis and really showing some things to teams. Was a sought-after free agent last year. And now this is a real low. But for me, Jason, I'm going to counter your 0 of the week with my own, which is the punitive drug suspensions here. I mean, as you mentioned, we're moving away from this. I think as a society, we understand that marijuana maybe isn't the boogeyman that it once was. And I think in general, if these are substances of abuse, which is what the reporting has been so far, that this is something that tends to be more of an addiction problem for these players and not something that I think is necessarily reflective of a cheating mentality or anything like that. And it's hard for me to stomach a 2-year suspension, particularly when you go back a few years. You look at a guy like Rashard Lewis, who had only a 10-game suspension for PEDs, which to me are obviously a lot more damaging to the game. If you have guys who are trying to get an unfair advantage, that's something that I would think would be taken more seriously than if someone has an actual problem. And so I think that contrast makes it hard for me to feel good about this sort of suspension. I'd like to see what they can do to treat this as a health issue and help Tyreke Evans, sort of get help and make sure that he's okay rather than denying him income for a couple years. I mean, I do think, though, to your point, Jason, this is almost certainly going to push Evans to Europe. This will make him, interestingly, one of the more high-profile NBA players to go over to Europe at the tail end of his prime. So, I mean, this could be the end of his NBA career because I have to imagine that the European League, maybe the Chinese League, are going to try and sign him. He may get a relatively large deal in all of this because he will be one of the better players to move that way. but I think this may be the last we see of him in the NBA.
Now, Ben, I don't want to end the show on a low note, so I'm going to go ahead and give my heat check of the week, and that's that I'm proud of the Minnesota Timberwolves for making a sound basketball decision. And it's just a good move for the Timberwolves. You're seeing all these fast rebuilds in the West, with the Pelicans likely getting Zion, the Grizzlies with John Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. if they land him with the number 2 pick. And now you're seeing the Timberwolves with some continuity at the coaching staff. Karl Anthony Towns loves them. He's a good young head coach in today's NBA. And it's good just to see some stability coming out of the Timberwolves organization that we haven't seen since Kevin Garnett's first stint there. So I'm proud of them for making a good decision, and it's good to see Ryan Saunders, son of Flip, get a multi-year deal to be the head coach of the Timberwolves. I
felt a little Game of Thrones vibe there. Ryan Saunders, son of Flip, first of his name, breaker of chains. I like it though, Jason. I mean, he stepped up as Thibodeau leaves. He's helped stabilize this young team, and this is a young team that does have a lot of talent in guys like Karl Anthony Towns. We'll see what happens with Wiggins. I mean, I don't know what's left of Wiggins' chances as an all-star caliber player, and it's unclear if he has what's needed both physically and mentally to really get himself to that level, because he just hasn't shown it. This season was definitely not an inspiring one if you're a believer in Wiggins' potential. So we'll see how that goes. But there is one other piece of news here, Jason. I wanted to get your thoughts. My beloved Bulls managed to get Chris Fleming from your beloved Brooklyn Nets. And now, this week, the news comes out that another person from the Nets organization that managed to make the playoffs this season is now moving on to another team.
Yeah, Sean Marks lost his right-hand man, Triumphant, and he's going to join David Griffin and try and accelerate that rebuild with Zion, and whether or not they keep Anthony Davis. I know he still wants to leave. You're kind of seeing Sean Marks and Kenny Atkinson have a tree, if you will, because they already lost their last 2 G League head coaches to European head coaching jobs. They lost Fleming to the Bulls, who was Atkinson's offensive coordinator. Again, Ben, great move for Jim Boylan. And now they lose Langdon, and it's going to hurt. Even though Sean Marks is there, he's got an extension. This is more about it's a great move for the Pelicans, who have had an awesome offseason given their turbulent regular season with the whole Anthony Davis drama. But I think it's a good move for the Pelicans, and it's a good sign that the Nets culture is dramatically improved.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, I suppose, because on the one hand, it shows how far the Nets have come. It's always nice to have guys from your team wanted. It means you're doing a good job, but obviously it's sad to see them leave because it means that you have to get new guys. But the Nets have shown an ability under this new regime with Marks and Atkinson to really rebuild, reload, replace when needed. So I think that they'll be okay. And I think it bodes well for an offseason that's going to be pivotal. Perhaps the most influential and important offseason of the Nets' history, with a number of marquee free agents potentially coming to Brooklyn. We'll see what happens. I know for you, this is a kind of an interesting thing. We had Anthony Puccio on. He's recently said that the Nets may be looking into Kyrie Irving, maybe Anthony Davis sweepstakes. So who knows? Maybe the Nets can trade Trajan Langdon in and add Anthony Davis over to the Brooklyn squad. I think I'd take that trade if I was a Nets fan, Jason.
Oh, yeah, no bones about it. I think a lot of the hype with Anthony Davis to the Nets has come with Langdon because Langdon left the Nets on good terms, and, hey, he may be more apt to deal Davis in a more favorable deal. Langdon loved the Nets, sure. He had a great run there. But the fact of the matter is the NBA is a business. So it's all about getting the Pelicans up and running. They'll likely select Zion Williamson with the top pick. We'll see what he can recoup in a deal for Davis. I know that Alvin Gentry likes a lot of the young players on the Lakers. So you see if Alonzo Ball, Kyle Kuzma, Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart package goes to New Orleans to play with Zion, and then you might see a young up-and-coming team in New Orleans. But that remains to be seen. This is more about Langdon. It's a great get for proud of the culture going on in Brooklyn right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as I alluded to, If Mr. Langdon wants to become a beloved